shy waitress greeted the Mafia boss's Sicilian father. Her dialect froze the room. "He doesn't eat cold soup, he doesn't drink anything that's been open for more than 3 minutes, and he certainly doesn't forgive mistakes," Petra whispered, her nails digging into the soft flesh of Oriana's upper arm. "If you spill a single drop of vintage Bordeaux on Eldridge Crestford's suit, don't bother coming back to the kitchen. Just keep walking out the front door and pray they don't follow you." Oriana swallowed hard, clutching the tray until her knuckles turned white. Is he really that dangerous? Petra's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Honey, the last waiter who disrespected the Stormburn family wasn't fired. He just evaporated. The restaurant, Loyalties, sat in the belly of a repurposed bank vault in the heart of Lower Manhattan's financial district. It was a place of aggressive opulence, where the walls were lined with brushed gold, and the floor was a marble mosaic that cost more than Oriana Ravensgate would earn in 10 lifetimes. The air was perpetually dry, conditioned to a crisp 68 degrees to preserve the rare wines and the even rarer temperaments of the clientele. There was no weather inside Loyalties. The bone-dry winter wind howling through the concrete canyons outside was irrelevant here. Here, the climate was controlled by money. Oriana adjusted her apron for the 10th time in a minute. It was a size too big, bunching at her waist, making her feel even smaller than she was. At 23, Oriana had spent her life trying to be invisible. She was a ghost in the machine of New York City, a linguistics student drowning in debt, working double shifts to keep a roof over her head, and to pay for the nursing home where her grandmother, Nana Rossi, drifted in and out of lucidity. "Table 4 needs water. Now, Ravensgate." The voice cracked like a whip. Petra Kingsfall, the floor manager of Loyalties, stood by the hostess stand like a sentinel. Petra was beautiful in the way a jagged icicle is beautiful, sharp, cold, and capable of drawing blood. She had sleek, blonde hair, pulled back so tight it pulled her eyes into a permanent glare. She hated Oriana. It wasn't for any specific reason. Perhaps it was because Oriana was quiet, or perhaps because Petra sensed a resilience in the shy girl that she couldn't break. "Going, Miss Kingsfall," Oriana murmured, grabbing the crystal pitcher. "And fix your collar," Petra hissed as she passed. "You look like a refugee, not an employee of a Michelin-starred establishment." Oriana kept her head down, navigating the labyrinth of tables. The dining room was filling up. It was a Friday night, the air thick with the scent of truffle oil, seared wagyu, and expensive perfume. The noise level was a low, sophisticated hum, the sound of deals being struck and reputations being dismantled over foie gras. In the corner, Quenessa Moorvale, a fellow server with kind eyes and a cynicism that kept her sane, caught Oriana's eye. She mouthed, "Breath." Oriana nodded slightly, pouring water for a couple who didn't even acknowledge her existence. That was the job. To be a pair of floating hands, a delivery system for luxury. But tonight felt different. The kitchen staff had been on edge since 3 p.m. The chef, a tyrannical Frenchman named Jean-Luc, had thrown a saucepan at a sous chef because the reduction was too optimistic. The reason for the tension was the reservation at table 1. The table sat on a raised platform, secluded by velvet ropes, offering a panoramic view of the dining room, while keeping the occupants separated from the common millionaires. "They're early," Rosalinda Crowhall whispered, rushing past Oriana with a basket of bread. Rosalind was new, ambitious, and loved gossip more than tips. The security team just swept the perimeter. "Security?" Oriana asked, retreating to the service station. "Draven Stormburn," Rosalind said, her eyes widening, "and his father, the old lion, Eldridge Crestford." Oriana felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The names were staples of the tabloids and the darker corners of the internet. Drevin Stormburn ran a logistics empire that the FBI had been trying to dismantle for a decade. He was the modern face of organized crime, corporate, sleek, untouchable. His father, Eldridge, was a relic of a bloodier time, a man whose Sicilian lineage was steeped in folklore and violence. "Why are they eating here?" Oriana asked, wiping a spot from a wine glass. "Don't they have private clubs?" "Petra says it's a power move," Quinessa whispered, joining them. "They're meeting a rival, someone from the Jersey Syndicate. Neutral ground." "Ravensgate." Petra's voice cut through the whispers, front and center. Oriana froze. She walked slowly to where Petra stood by the heavy oak doors. Petra was holding a tablet, her face pale, but her eyes gleaming with malice. "Rosalinda has the shakes," Petra said, dismissing the other girl with a wave. "She can't pour wine without rattling the bottle against the glass. You're taking table 1. Oriana's heart hammered against her ribs. "Ms. Kingsfall, I've never done VIP service. Quinessa is senior." "Quinessa is too chatty," Petra snapped. "They don't want personality. They want a shadow. You're good at being a nobody, aren't you?" It was a cruel barb, but it landed. Oriana bit her lip. "Yes, Miss Kingsfall." "Good. Falcon Ravenwell is already inside. He's doing the final check. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make eye contact. And for the love of God, if the old man speaks to you, just nod. He speaks 5 languages, and half of them are threats." Oriana smoothed her apron, her hands trembling. She looked toward the raised platform of table 1. It looked less like a dining table and more like an altar where sacrifices were made. She took a deep breath, trying to summon the calm she felt when she was translating ancient texts in the university library. But this wasn't dead language on a page. This was living, breathing danger. The heavy front doors swung open. The air in the restaurant seemed to follow a vacuum, sucked out into the street, leaving the room in a sudden, breathless silence. The entrance of Drevin Stormburn was not loud, but it was heavy. He didn't walk. He occupied space, forcing the world to rearrange itself around him. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit, cut so perfectly it looked like a second skin. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that was arresting in its severity. High cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, and eyes the color of a stormy sea, devoid of warmth. He walked with the confident stride of a man who owned the pavement beneath his feet. Flanking him was Falcon Ravenwell, his head of security. Falcon was a contrast to Draven's polished menace. He was rugged, scarred, with eyes that darted to every corner, every exit, every hand reaching into a pocket. But it was the man between them who drew the true fear. Eldridge Crestford used a cane, not out of necessity, but as a weapon. The handle was silver, shaped like the head of a griffin. He was shorter than his son, his back slightly hunched, wearing a suit that was 20 years out of style, but immaculately pressed. His face was a map of the Sicilian countryside, weathered, lined and hardened by decades of sun and vendettas. He had the eyes of a raptor, black and unblinking. The entire restaurant fell silent. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Conversations died in throats. Petra Kingsfall stepped forward, her professional mask firmly in place. "Mr. Stormburn, Mr. Crestford, welcome to Lockwoolly." "We are honored." Drevin didn't look at her. He scanned the room, his gaze lingering on a table of businessmen in the corner before dismissing them. "Is the table ready?" His voice was a deep baritone, smooth like aged whiskey, but with a burn. "Of course." Petra bowed slightly. "Right this way." She led them through the dining room. Oriana stood by the service station, holding a tray of menus, feeling like a rabbit in the presence of wolves. As they passed, Draven stopped. He didn't turn his head, but he paused, just for a fraction of a second, near Oriana. He smelled of sandalwood, cold air, and gun oil. Then he moved on. They took their seats at table 1. The vantage point allowed them to see everyone, but no one could hear them. Falcon Ravenwell did not sit. He stood a few feet away, his back to the wall, arms crossed. Petra snapped her fingers at Oriana. "Go. Menus, water. Pour from the left. Do not spill." Oriana picked up the heavy leather-bound menus. Her legs felt like lead. She approached the table, the sound of her own heartbeat deafening in her ears. "Gentlemen," she whispered, the word barely escaping her throat. Draven looked up. Up close, he was devastating. There was a scar running through his left eyebrow, a small imperfection that made him reel. He looked at her, really looked at her, and Oriana felt stripped bare. He wasn't looking at her uniform or her face. He was assessing her threat level. Finding it at 0, he lost interest. "Sparkling," Draven said, not opening the menu. "Still," Eldridge rasped. His voice was like grinding stones. He looked at Oriana, his black eyes narrowing. "And tell the chef, no salt." "Yes, sir," Oriana squeaked. She poured the water. Her hand shook. A tiny droplet of condensation fell from the bottle, landing not on the table, but on the back of Eldridge's hand. Time stopped. Petra, watching from the floor, went pale. Falcon took a half-step forward. Eldridge looked at the droplet on his hand. Then he looked up at Oriana. His expression didn't change, which was terrifying. "I apologize," Oriana breathed, instinctively reaching for a napkin from her apron to dab it, then freezing, realizing touching him might mean losing a hand. Draven watched the interaction, a flicker of amusement crossing his face. "Careful, miss. My father is allergic to incompetence. I will bring a fresh towel," she stammered, backing away. "Leave it," Eldridge said. He wiped the water away with his own thumb. "Bring the wine list, the real one, not the one you give the tourists." Oriana nodded and fled. Back at the station, she leaned against the counter, hyperventilating. "You're alive," Quinessa whispered, passing her a napkin. "That's a start." "I dripped on him," Oriana said, horrified. "He didn't kill you," Quinessa noted. "Draven Stormburn is actually in a good mood. I saw him smirk. He was laughing at me. Better laughed at than shot at. Go back out there. They need to order." Oriana composed herself. She had to do this. She needed the tips. She needed the job. She thought of her grandmother, lying in that sterile room, muttering in her sleep about the olive groves and the fire. "Do it for Nana," she told herself. When she returned, the atmosphere at the table had shifted. A fourth man had joined them. He was heavy-set, sweating, looking uncomfortable in a suit that was too tight. This was the rival. The tension was palpable. The air around the table felt charged with static electricity. Draven was leaning back, relaxed. Eldridge was leaning forward, staring at the newcomer. Oriana approached cautiously. She needed to take the order, but interrupting felt like walking into a knife fight. "The territory remains ours," Draven was saying, his voice low. "The docks, the warehouses. You pay the tariff, you move your product. That was the agreement." "Prices have gone up, Stormburn," the sweaty man said. "My people are squeezed." "Your people are greedy," Eldridge spat. Oriana cleared her throat softly. The three men looked at her. Would you like to order now?" she asked. The sweaty man looked at her with disdain. "Get lost, girl. We're talking." Draven's eyes flashed. "She is doing her job. You will show respect." The defense was unexpected. Oriana blinked. "I'll have the veal," Draven said, his eyes locking onto hers. Rare. The risotto, the sweaty man grunted. Eldridge did not look at the menu. He was staring at the tablecloth, his fingers tracing the pattern of the weave. He looked agitated. The arrival of the rival had soured his mood. He muttered something under his breath, a string of words that sounded like Italian, but twisted, darker. Oriana froze. She knew those words. The kitchen was a chaotic inferno, a stark contrast to the glacial tension of the dining room. Oriana placed the order, her mind reeling. She had heard Eldridge speak, just a murmur, but the cadence was unmistakable. It wasn't standard Italian. It wasn't even the Sicilian dialect most people knew from the movies. It was Arborescia, mixed with an ancient, localized dialect from the hinterlands of Palermo, a dead tongue from a specific valley that had been depopulated in the 1920s. A language of ghosts. "Service!" Jean-Luc screamed, slamming a plate of veal onto the pass. Oriana grabbed the plates. She had to focus. She balanced the heavy tray and marched back out. When she arrived at table 1, the argument had escalated. The sweaty man was red in the face. Falcon had moved closer, his hand hovering near his jacket. Draven looked bored, which was his most dangerous look. But Eldridge was furious. He was shaking, his face a mask of old rage. "You think you can come to my table and dictate terms?" Eldridge slammed his hand down. The silverware rattled. "The world has changed, old man," the rival sneered. "Your ways are dead. Your family is a museum piece." Eldridge stood up. He was small, but in that moment he looked 10 feet tall. He unleashed a torrent of words. It was a guttural, rapid-fire stream of sounds that baffled the room. The rival blinked. "Speak English, you senile bat," Draven sighed, rubbing his temples. "Father, sit down. He doesn't understand the old tongue." Eldridge ignored his son. He pointed a trembling finger at the rival, his voice rising, cracking with emotion. He was shouting now, but no one understood him. The diners at nearby tables were staring, alarmed. Petra was rushing over, looking terrified. "He's having a stroke," the rival laughed nervously. "He's speaking gibberish." Eldridge turned purple. He was grasping for a word, a specific concept, pounding his chest, trying to express a specific type of betrayal that English had no word for. He looked isolated, trapped in his own history, a king with no subjects who could understand his decree. The frustration was physically paining him. The room was frozen. Silence stretched, agonizing and thick. Draven looked ready to silence the rival permanently just to end the scene. Oriana stepped forward. She didn't think. It was an instinct born of 1,000 nights, sitting by her grandmother's bedside, listening to the same stories, the same proverbs. She placed the veal in front of Draven, then turned to Eldridge. She looked him in the eye and spoke. "U sangu non si fa acqua, ma u tradituri si bivi, u vilenu du so stissu core." The sound of her voice cut through the tension like a razor wire. The dialect was perfect. The accent was not American. It was thick, heavy, carrying the dust of the Sicilian hills. Translation: blood does not become water, but the traitor drinks the poison of his own heart. The silence that followed was absolute. The rival's mouth hung open. Falcon Ravenwell's eyes went wide. Draven stopped midway through reaching for his wine glass, his hand freezing in the air. He looked at the shy, trembling waitress as if she had just grown wings and breathed fire. But the reaction of Eldridge Crestford was the most profound. The rage drained from his face instantly, replaced by a shock so deep it looked like fear. He slowly lowered himself back into his chair, his eyes locked on Oriana. He looked at her as if he were seeing a ghost. "Where?" Eldridge whispered, his voice trembling, this time in English. Where did you hear the words of the dead valley? Oriana clutched her tray to her chest, realizing what she had done. The entire restaurant was staring. Petra looked ready to faint. My grandmother, Oriana whispered. She is from the village of Corleone, but her mother was from the valley above. She taught me. Eldridge stared at her. His hands, previously shaking with rage, were now still. He looked at Draven, then back at Oriana. Who is your grandmother? He demanded. Ilara, Oriana said softly. Ilara Rossi. Eldridge inhaled sharply, a sound like a dying gasp. He gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles were white. Ilara, he breathed. The name seemed to hit him with the force of a physical blow. Draven was watching his father, his analytical mind racing. He had never seen his father react like this. He turned his gaze to Oriana. The boredom was gone. In its place was a burning, predatory intensity. He wasn't looking at a waitress anymore. He was looking at a puzzle. Leave us, Draven said to the rival, his voice ice cold. Now. But the deal, the rival started. Falcon, Draven said. Falcon stepped forward. The rival scrambled up, knocking his chair over, and fled the restaurant. Draven didn't watch him go. He kept his eyes fixed on Oriana. He pointed to the empty chair where the rival had sat. Sit down, Draven commanded. Sir, I can't, Oriana stammered, looking at Petra, who was paralyzed with shock in the distance. I'm working. My manager. I just bought the restaurant, Draven said, not breaking eye contact. Sit down. Oriana looked at the empty chair, then at the terrifying old man who was looking at her with tears welling in his raptor eyes, and finally at Draven, whose gaze promised that her life as an invisible girl was officially over. She sat. The chair was upholstered in velvet, warm from the body heat of the rival who had just fled, but to Oriana it felt like sitting on a block of ice. The restaurant remained in a state of suspended animation. 40 tables of New York's elite were pretending not to watch, their gazes darting toward table 1 like iron filings to a magnet. Oriana sat with her back straight, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Across from her, Eldridge Crestford was no longer the terrifying mob patriarch. He was a man haunting his own memories. He reached into his vest pocket, his movements slow and deliberate, and pulled out a silver cigarette case. He didn't open it. He just ran his thumb over the engraving on the lid. Ilara, he said again, the name tasting like smoke and old wine in his mouth. She told you she was from Corleone? Yes, sir, Oriana whispered. She said she worked in the vineyards. Eldridge let out a short, dry laugh that sounded like a bark. Vineyards, is that what she calls them? She worked in the shadows, child. Your grandmother was not a picker of grapes. She was a messagera. A messenger. Draven Stormburn poured himself a glass of the vintage Bordeaux, his movements fluid and precise. He didn't look at his father. He watched Oriana. His gaze was dissecting her, peeling back the layers of the shy waitress to find the steel that had allowed her to speak the old tongue. A messenger for who? Draven asked, his voice low. For the silence, Eldridge replied cryptically. He leaned forward, his black raptor eyes locking onto Oriana's hazel ones. In 1968, a war broke out in the valley. The police couldn't stop it. The government ignored it. It was family against family. I was young, foolish. I was shot in the stomach and left to die in a dry riverbed. Oriana's breath hitched. She knew this story. Nana Rossi told it differently. She had found a lost dog and nursed it back to health. She found me, Eldridge continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. She didn't run. She dragged me into a cave. She stitched me up with fishing line and kept me hidden for 3 weeks while the men with hunting dogs searched the hills. She sang to me in that dialect, the dialect of the Dead Valley. It is a language of protection, child, a language that spirits cannot hear. He paused, his hand shaking slightly as he reached out to touch Oriana's wrist. His skin was like parchment, dry and cold. "I owe her a life," Eldridge said, the weight of the words sinking the table into a deeper gravity. "And the Stormburns always pay their debts." Drevin set his glass down. The sharp click against the crystal coaster sounded like a gavel falling. "If she is Ilara's kin, she is not a waitress. Not anymore." "No," Eldridge agreed, withdrawing his hand. "She is family." Oriana felt panic rising in her throat. "Mr. Crestford, Mr. Stormburn, I appreciate the sentiment, truly. But I have rent to pay. I have shifts next week. I can't just be family." Drevin turned to her, a faint, cynical smile playing on his lips. "You think you can go back to pouring water after this? You just humiliated a capo from the Jersey Syndicate in front of the most powerful men in the city. You sat at my table. In their eyes, you are now mine." The possession in his voice sent a jolt of electricity down her spine. It wasn't romantic. It was territorial. "Yours," she stammered. "My asset. My responsibility. My target," Drevin listed, ticking them off on his fingers. "Vinny, the man who just ran away, is not a forgiving man. He will think you are a consigliere, a secret weapon. If you walk out that door alone, you won't make it to the subway station." Oriana looked around the restaurant. The golden walls suddenly felt like the bars of a very expensive cage. She looked at Petra Kingsfall, who was standing by the kitchen doors, pale and trembling. Petra knew that the hierarchy had just been shattered. "What do I do?" Oriana whispered, feeling the weight of her grandmother's secret pressing down on her. Eldridge tapped his cane on the floor. "You finish dinner. Then we go to Ilara." The meal was a blur. Oriana ate the veal Drevin ordered for her, though it tasted like ash. She was hyper-aware of everything, the click of silverware, the hush of the room, the heat radiating from Drevin sitting next to her. He didn't speak to her much, but he ensured her glass was full, his attentiveness a performance for the watching eyes. He was signaling to the room, "She's under the shield." When the bill came, Falcon Ravenwell intercepted the server before he could even reach the table. "It's taken care of," Falcon said, his voice gravelly. Drevin stood up, buttoning his jacket. The movement was a signal. The entire restaurant seemed to exhale. "Let's go," Drevin said. Oriana stood, her legs wobbling. My purse. My coat. They're in the locker room." "Falcon will get them," Drevin said. "I need to clock out," Oriana insisted, clinging to the shred of normalcy. "And I need to tell Petra." Drevin looked at her, then nodded once. "Go. 2 minutes." Oriana hurried toward the kitchen, conscious of Falcon shadowing her 3 steps behind. She burst through the swinging doors into the clamor of the kitchen. The noise was overwhelming after the quiet of the dining room. Chefs were shouting, pans were clattering, but it all stopped when she entered. Jean-Luc, the tyrant chef, looked at her with wide eyes. Rosalind dropped a basket of bread rolls. Petra Kingsfall was waiting by the time clock. She looked like a cornered animal, vicious and terrified. "You think you're special?" Petra hissed, stepping into Oriana's path. "Because the old man is senile? You think you can just sit down with murderers and then come back here and polish silver?" "I just want my coat, Petra," Oriana said, her voice shaking but firm. "You're fired," Petra spat. "Get your trash and get out. You've ruined the night. You've ruined the reputation of this house." "Actually, A deep voice rumbled from the doorway. Falcon Ravenwell stepped into the kitchen. He was too big for the space, his shoulders brushing the doorframe. He held Oriana's cheap wool coat in one hand and her worn backpack in the other. "Ms. Ravensgate resigned," Falcon said calmly. "And regarding the reputation of the house, Mr. Stormburn has decided to close Locule for renovations, indefinitely." Petra's jaw dropped. "What? You can't—" "The reservations." "The building has been purchased," Falcon said, handing the coat to Oriana. "Effective immediately. The staff will be compensated, except for management." Falcon looked at Petra with cold indifference. Mr. Stormburn noticed the bruises on Miss Ravensgate's arm. He doesn't like it when people damage his property. Petra paled, instinctively covering her own arm. It was training. Discipline." "It was a mistake," Falcon corrected. He turned to Oriana. "Ready, miss?" Oriana looked at Petra. For years, this woman had made her life a misery. She had mocked her clothes, stolen her tips, and made her feel small. But now, seeing Petra shrinking under Falcon's gaze, Oriana felt only pity. "Goodbye, Petra," Oriana said softly. She turned and followed Falcon out the back exit. The alleyway was cold, the winter wind biting through her thin uniform, but the cold was cut short by the presence of 3 black SUVs idling at the curb. The engines purred with a low, menacing rumble. Draven was leaning against the middle vehicle, scrolling through something on his phone. When he saw her, he pocketed the device and opened the rear door. "Get in," he said. "Where are we going?" Oriana asked, clutching her backpack straps. "To see Alara," Draven said. "And then to a safe house. Your apartment in Queens is compromised. How do you know where I live?" Draven raised an eyebrow. "I know everything, Oriana. I know you're 3 months behind on your student loans. I know you take the 7 train at 2 a.m. I know you buy tulips for your grandmother every Sunday because they were her husband's favorite. You have a digital footprint a mile wide." He gestured to the open door. "In, now." Oriana climbed in. The interior was warm, smelling of leather and safety. Eldridge was already in the other seat, his eyes closed, his cane resting between his knees. Draven slid in beside her, the door thumping shut, sealing them off from the world. "Drive," Draven ordered the driver. The SUV pulled away, merging into the traffic of the financial district. Oriana watched the city blur past the tinted windows. She felt like she was underwater, watching the surface move further and further away. "Why?" she asked quietly, looking at Draven. "Why go to this trouble? Your father owes a debt, I understand that. But you don't seem like a man who cares about old stories." Draven turned to her. The streetlights flickered across his face, illuminating the scar on his brow. "I don't care about stories," he admitted. "I care about leverage. My father is the head of the family, but his grip is slipping. The other families smell blood. They think he's old, weak, but tonight you proved he has connections they can't even fathom. You spoke a dead language that only the inner circle of the Sicilian ghosts know. You made him look like a mystic, a prophet." He leaned inward closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You are a symbol, Oriana, and symbols are powerful. As long as you are by his side, they will fear him, and if they fear him, they won't attack me while I consolidate power." "So I'm a prop," Oriana said, a spark of anger flaring in her chest. "You're a shield," Draven corrected, "and in exchange, I pay off your debts. I move your grandmother to a private facility with the best doctors in the world, and I ensure that Petra Kingsfall never works in this city again." It was a deal with the devil. Oriana knew it. But as she thought of Nana Rossi in the state-funded home, waiting for a nurse who rarely came, she knew she couldn't say no. "Fine," she whispered. Draven smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had seen. It was terrifying. "Good girl." The convoy moved north, cutting through the arteries of Manhattan. The silence in the car was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic tapping of Eldridge's finger on the head of his cane. Oriana stared out the window. They were passing Times Square. The neon lights were blinding, a chaotic kaleidoscope of advertisements for happiness she couldn't afford. "Falcon," Draven said suddenly, his voice sharp. "We have a tail." Oriana froze. She looked at the driver, whose eyes were glued to the rear-view mirror. "2 cars," Falcon's voice crackled over the intercom. "Sedans, no plates, following tight." "Vinny," Eldridge growled, his eyes snapping open. "The fool doesn't know when to quit." "He's humiliated," Draven said, unbuttoning his suit jacket and reaching into a holster beneath his arm. He pulled out a sleek, black handgun. He checked the chamber with a practiced ease that made Oriana's stomach churn. "He needs to make a statement before we get to the bridge." "Get down!" Draven ordered Oriana. "What?" "Get on the floor, now!" Oriana scrambled off the seat, curling into a ball in the footwell between the front and back seats. The leather smelled of polish and fear. "Box them in," Draven commanded the driver. The SUV surged forward. The engine roared, a beast unleashed. Oriana felt the G-force press her against the carpet. Bang! A sound like a hammer hitting metal rang out. The rear window shattered, showering the back seat in diamonds of safety glass. "They're shooting!" Oriana screamed, covering her head. "Stay down!" Draven yelled. He turned in his seat, aiming through the shattered window. He fired 2 shots, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. The SUV swerved violently. Tires screeched. Outside, the world was a blur of honking horns and chaos. "Falcon, take the left flank!" Draven barked into his earpiece. Behind them, the second SUV in their convoy peeled off, slamming sideways into one of the pursuing sedans. There was a sickening crunch of metal on metal. "One down," the driver reported. "The other is closing," Eldridge said calmly. He hadn't moved. He sat amidst the broken glass like a statue, watching the violence with a bored detachment. "He's trying to pit us." The pursuing car rammed their bumper. The SUV shuddered. Oriana was thrown against Draven's legs. He didn't flinch. His hand came down, resting firmly on her shoulder, holding her steady. His grip was iron. "Hold on," Draven said. He leaned out the broken window, the wind whipping his hair. He fired 3 more times. Pop! 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 There was a loud blowout. The pursuing car behind them careened wildly, spinning across 3 lanes of traffic before slamming into a concrete divider in a shower of sparks. "Target neutralized," the driver said, his voice void of emotion. Draven pulled himself back inside. He engaged the safety on his weapon and holstered it. He brushed a shard of glass off his sleeve. "Is everyone intact?" he asked. "I am fine," Eldridge said, dusting off his lap. "But the upholstery is ruined." Draven looked down at the floor. Oriana was looking up at him, her eyes wide, her face pale. She was shaking uncontrollably. "You can get up now," Draven said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Oriana scrambled back onto the seat. The wind was rushing through the broken window, freezing cold. She looked back. The wreck was fading into the distance, a twisted heap of metal under the neon glow of a billboard advertising a Broadway musical. Did you kill them?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I stopped them," Draven said. He took off his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy, warm, and smelled of him, gunpowder and sandalwood. "There is a difference." "They will not stop," Eldridge said, looking at Oriana. You have marked yourself, child. You are the girl who spoke the words. They think you are a witch, or a genius, or a spy. Either way, you are valuable. Oriana pulled Draven's jacket tighter around her. She looked at the man beside her. He was checking his phone again, as if he hadn't just been in a gunfight. "Who are you people?" she whispered. Draven looked at her, the passing streetlights illuminating the hard planes of his face. "We are the storm," he said simply. "And you, Oriana, are right in the eye of it." The SUV sped up, leaving the lights of the city behind, heading toward the darkness of the bridges and the secrets that lay beyond. The nursing home, ironically named Serenity Gardens, sat on a neglected corner of Queens, squeezed between a 24-hour tire shop and a shuttered bodega. It was a drab brick building that exhaled the scent of antiseptic, boiled cabbage, and neglect. It was a warehouse for the forgotten, a place where people were stored rather than cared for, their lives measured in medication schedules and fluorescent flickers. When the convoy of 3 black SUVs pulled up to the curb, displacing the slush and grey grime of the street, the contrast was violent. The vehicles were sleek, armoured predators in a graveyard of rusted sedans. The night shift security guard, a man whose uniform was 2 sizes too tight, dropped his sandwich in his lap, his eyes widening as he watched the lead vehicle's door open. Draven Stormburn didn't wait for permission or protocol. He stepped out onto the cracked pavement, his breath pluming in the icy air. He adjusted his cufflinks, buttoned his cashmere coat, and strode toward the automatic doors with the energy of a battering ram. Falcon was at his right hand, a silent mountain of muscle scanning the rooftops. Oriana trailed behind, still wrapped in Draven's suit jacket, the sleeves hanging over her hands. She felt small, but the proximity to Draven gave her a strange, terrifying sense of invulnerability. Eldridge remained in the car, his face pressed against the tinted glass. He was too frail for the stairs, his legs weak from the shock of the evening. But his anxiety was palpable, vibrating through the frame of the vehicle. Inside, the lobby was dim and overheated. A television in the corner blared a late-night infomercial to an empty room. "We are here for Elara Rossi," Draven announced to the receptionist. She was a tired woman behind a thick pane of plexiglass, her face illuminated by the blue light of a computer monitor. She didn't look up immediately, finishing a text message on her phone. When she finally raised her eyes, her expression was one of practiced boredom. "Visiting hours ended at 8. Come back tomorrow." "We aren't visiting," Falcon said, his voice deep enough to rattle the pens in the cup on her desk. He placed a heavy hand on the counter. "We're relocating." The woman sighed, snapping her gum. "You can't just move a patient. There's paperwork, discharge forms, doctor approvals. It takes 3 to 5 business days." Draven stepped closer to the glass. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He slid a folded envelope across the stainless steel counter. It was thick, heavy with cash. "This is for the inconvenience," Draven said smoothly. "And this?" He placed a business card on top of the envelope. It was black, with nothing but a phone number embossed in gold. "This is for your silence. If anyone asks, Elara Rossi was transferred to a private facility in Switzerland tonight." The woman looked at the envelope, then at the card, and finally at Draven's cold, storm-grey eyes. The boredom vanished, replaced by a primal instinct for self-preservation. She swallowed hard, her hand trembling as she took the envelope. "Room 304, she whispered, her voice cracking. "3rd floor. The elevator is to the left." They moved quickly. The elevator was a metal box that smelled of bleach and despair. It groaned as it ascended. Oriana leaned against the wall, a knot of guilt tightening in her stomach. I hated leaving her here, she confessed, her voice barely audible over the hum of the lift. It was the only place Medicare would cover. Every time I left, I felt like I was abandoning her. Draven glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. You did what you had to do to keep her alive. Survival isn't always dignified, Oriana. But tonight, dignity returns. The doors slid open on the 3rd floor. The hallway was long and shadowed, lined with wheelchairs and medical carts. The sound of coughing drifted from open doors, a chorus of the unwell. When they entered room 304, it was dark, illuminated only by the orange glow of the streetlights filtering through the blinds. The room was cold. Nana Rossi was a small lump in the bed, buried under thin, institutional blankets. Her breathing was shallow, a fragile rasp in the quiet room. Oriana rushed to her side, her heart breaking all over again. "Nana! Nana, it's me! It's Oriana!" The old woman stirred. Her eyes opened, cloudy with age and cataracts. She looked at Oriana, but there was no recognition, only fear. She pulled the blanket up to her chin, shrinking away. "Cisi," she murmured in the dialect. "Vatini, unhayunenti." "Who are you? Go away. I have nothing." "It's me, Nana," Oriana pleaded, switching to the dialect. "Sono io, la tua nipotina." Nana shook her head, confusion clouding her features. "No, no. The wolves are coming. They smell the blood." Draven stepped forward into the pool of light from the window. He didn't look like a monster in this light. He looked respectful, almost reverent. He took off his gloves. "Signora Rossi," he said, his voice low and commanding. He didn't speak the dialect, but he spoke with the cadence of the old world. "My father is waiting outside. Eldridge, the boy from the riverbed. Il Falco Piccolo." The name acted like a spark in a dark room. Clarity flooded the old woman's face, washing away the dementia for a fleeting, precious moment. She sat up, clutching Oriana's arm with surprising strength, her knuckles white. "Eldridge?" she rasped, looking past Oriana to the tall man in the expensive coat. "The little falcon? He is alive?" "He is," Draven said, bowing his head slightly. "And he has come to pay his debt. He has come to take you home." Tears welled in Elara's eyes. I thought the river took him." "The river tried," Draven said, "but you saved him." Getting her out was a logistical dance. There was no time to pack her meager belongings. Falcon lifted the old woman as if she weighed nothing, wrapping her in a thick wool blanket he had brought from the car. She looked tiny in his arms, a bird nested in a mountain. They moved through the halls like ghosts. A nurse, carrying a tray of medication, rounded the corner and froze, her eyes going wide as she saw the 2 large men and the patient. "Hey, you can't!" she started to shout. Falcon turned his head, fixing her with a stare that stopped the words in her throat. Draven paused, raising a finger to his lips. "She is sleeping," Draven whispered dangerously. "Do not wake her." The nurse backed away, pressing herself against the wall, letting them pass. When they emerged into the biting cold of the night, the air felt cleaner. They approached the lead SUV. The back window rolled down slowly. Eldridge Crestford leaned out. The street lamp illuminated his weathered face, the lines of age deep and profound. He looked at the woman in Falcon's arms. The 2 old souls, separated by half a century, by oceans, by a lifetime of violence and silence, locked eyes. The years seemed to melt away. Eldridge reached out, his hand trembling, and took her withered hand in his. "Ti ricordi la valle, Elara?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Do you remember the valley, Elara?" Elara smiled, a toothless, beautiful smile that transformed her face, making her look 20 again. La Valle non dimentica mai, Eldridge, she replied softly. The valley never forgets, Eldridge. Falcon gently placed her in the seat next to him. Eldridge didn't let go of her hand. Oriana climbed into the back of the second SUV with Draven. As the door thudded shut, sealing out the noise and the smell of the nursing home, she felt a profound shift in the universe. She wasn't just a struggling student saving her grandmother anymore. She was completing a circle that had begun in a blood-soaked valley in 1968. She looked at Draven. He was watching the mirrors, checking for tails, ever the predator. But his hand rested on the seat between them, close to hers. "Thank you," she said softly. "You didn't just save her life. You gave her back her memory." Draven turned to her. The harsh lights of the dashboard cast shadows across his face, highlighting the scar on his brow. "Debts must be paid, Oriana. It is the only law that matters." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "Don't thank me yet. We still have to survive the night." The safe house wasn't a house. It was a fortress of glass and steel perched on the cliffs of the Palisades, overlooking the Hudson River. It was modern, cold, and impenetrable. The convoy swept through the iron gates, which closed with a finality that made Oriana realize there was no turning back. Inside, the contrast to the cold exterior was stark. The floors were heated, the lighting was warm, and the furniture was Italian leather. It was a bachelor's paradise, sterile but luxurious. Medical staff, private doctors on Draven's payroll, were waiting. They whisked Nana Rossi and Eldridge away to a medical wing that rivaled any hospital. Oriana was left standing in the vast living room, clutching her backpack. She felt out of place, a smudge of poverty on a canvas of wealth. "Drink," Draven said, pressing a glass of amber liquid into her hand. "Brandy. It helps the shock." She took a sip. It burned, but it warmed the cold spot in her chest. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The lights of New York City twinkled across the river, distant and harmless from this height. "Is this where you live?" she asked. "This is where I exist," Draven corrected, loosening his tie. He looked tired. The adrenaline of the shootout had faded, leaving behind the weight of leadership. "My father lives in the old mansion in Long Island. I prefer vantage points." "It's lonely," Oriana observed. Draven walked up behind her. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. Loneliness is the price of command. If you let people in, you give them the power to destroy you. "Is that why you saved me?" she asked, turning to face him. "Because I'm useful? Or because you're lonely?" It was a bold question. Draven stared at her, his storm-grey eyes darkening. He reached out, his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. His touch was electric, making her breath hitch. "You are dangerous, Oriana," he murmured. "Not because you have a gun, but because you see things. You see the man, not the monster." "Maybe there isn't a difference," she whispered. The air between them was thick with tension. It was the classic pull of gravity between two bodies in a void. He leaned in, and for a second she thought he would kiss her. She wanted him to. She wanted to know what it felt like to be consumed by the storm. But suddenly, the lights in the house flickered. Red emergency lights bathed the room in a sinister glow. A siren, low and rhythmic, began to pulse. Draven pulled back instantly, the lover replaced by the soldier. He tapped his earpiece. "Falcon, report." "Perimeter breach," Falcon's voice came over the intercom, tight with strain. "Westgate. They bypassed the sensors. It's a heavy assault team." "How?" Draven snarled, pulling his gun. "Inside man," Falcon said. "The codes were deactivated from the terminal in the guest wing. Draven's eyes widened. The medical staff. He grabbed Oriana's arm. Stay with me. If we get separated, you go to the panic room in the library. Do not stop for anything. What about Nana? She cried. Falcon is with them, Draven said, dragging her toward the hallway. Right now, you are the target. The hallway was a tunnel of red light. Gunfire erupted from the lower level, the sharp crack of automatic weapons echoing off the marble floors. They reached the staircase just as a man in tactical gear crested the top step. He raised his rifle. Draven didn't hesitate. He fired twice, hitting the man in the chest and neck. The intruder tumbled backward. Draven moved with terrifying efficiency, shielding Oriana with his body as they descended. Who are they? Oriana screamed over the noise. Mercenaries, Draven grunted, reloading as they ran. Paid for by Vinny. He wants to wipe the board clean. They reached the library, heavy oak doors providing temporary cover. Draven shoved a heavy desk in front of the door. Listen to me, he said, grabbing her shoulders. There is a hidden elevator behind the bookcase. It goes to the garage. Take it. There is a car waiting. I'm not leaving without you, she said, surprising herself with the ferocity of her voice. I'm not leaving without my grandmother. There is no time for heroism, Draven yelled. The doors shook as someone rammed them from the other side. You said I was a symbol, Oriana said, her mind racing. She looked at the room. It was filled with books, artifacts, and a high-end intercom system on the desk. If Vinny is here, he's listening. He wants to gloat. She lunged for the intercom panel. What are you doing? Draven asked. Oriana hit the all-call button. Her voice would now be broadcast to every speaker in the house, inside and out. She didn't speak English. She didn't speak Italian. She spoke the old tongue, the language of the Dead Valley. But this time she didn't whisper it. She screamed it, her voice filled with the rage of generations of women who had protected their families from wolves. Le mura hanno l'occhi, e la terra havi la memoria. Ci trasi culu ferru, nesci culu focu. The walls have eyes, and the earth has memory. He who enters here with iron leaves with fire. It was a psychological weapon. To the mercenaries, it was just noise. But to Vinny, who was undoubtedly watching from a command vehicle or listening in, it was a curse. It was the sound of the superstition that all Italian mobsters, no matter how modern, secretly feared. Draven watched her, amazed. Outside the door, the battering stopped for a second. The mercenaries were confused. That second was all Draven needed. He kicked the desk away and threw the doors open. He didn't fire blindly. He moved like water, taking down 2 men in the doorway before they could react to the sudden silence. Falcon appeared at the end of the hall, a shotgun in hand, covering the medical wing. The hallway is clear. The medical staff are subdued. Your father is safe. Draven turned to Oriana. He looked at her with a mixture of awe and pride. She was breathing hard, clutching the desk, her hair wild. You bought us time, he said. I cursed them, she said, trembling. My grandmother said that curse brings bad luck to anyone who hears it with ill intent. Draven smirked. I think the bullets helped too. He walked over to her, holstering his weapon. The sounds of battle were fading. His security team had rallied, sweeping the house. It's over, Draven said. Vinny played his last card, and he lost. He took her face in his hands. This time there were no interruptions. He kissed her. It was hard, desperate, and tasted of brandy and survival. Oriana melted into him, wrapping her arms around his neck, anchoring herself in the storm. 3 months later, Loculi reopened. It was no longer a bank vault. It was a sanctuary. The name had been changed to La Val, the Valley. The clientele was still elite, the food still Michelin star quality. But the atmosphere had changed. There was no fear. Oriana stood by the entrance, no longer in a uniform that didn't fit. She wore a tailored black dress that screamed power. On her finger, a ring with the Stormburn crest sat heavy and gold. She wasn't a waitress. She wasn't just a manager. She watched as Eldridge Crestford sat at table 1, his health improved, sharing a bottle of wine with Nana Rossi. They were laughing, speaking in a language no one else understood. Draven walked up behind her, slipping his arm around her waist. He kissed her temple. "Table 4 is asking for the owner," he whispered. Oriana smiled, the shy girl gone forever. "Tell them she's busy." She turned back to the room, the queen of the Dead Valley, surveying her kingdom. And that is how a spilled drop of water and a few words from a forgotten dialect changed the fate of the New York underworld. Oriana Ravensgate didn't just survive the Mafia, she rewrote its history. If you enjoyed this story of danger, romance, and old world secrets, please smash that like button. It helps the channel grow so we can bring you more original stories. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a chapter. What do you think happened to Vinny? Did he leave the city, or did the curse catch up to him? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Thanks for watching.